My pool was crystal clear, until HOA Karen turned it into a bubble bath from hell. I warned her once. Now her precious lawn is about to get rinsed. HOA Karen filled my pool with bubbles, so I rerouted it onto her freshly seeded lawn. Part 1. The foam, the fury, and the funnel plan. 1 second, I was sipping iced tea under my umbrella, and the next, my backyard looked like a soap opera had exploded. Not metaphorically, I mean literally, waist-high bubbles rising out of my pool, sloshing over the edge, tumbling into my garden like a runaway foam party thrown by a rogue janitor. I blinked, once, twice, and then choked on my tea. This wasn't a prank. It was war. And I already knew exactly who launched the first sud. It had started out peaceful. A rare Saturday where everything felt right. Warm sun, acoustic guitar from my Bluetooth speaker, my pool, crystal clear, like glass. You could count the tiles at the bottom. After months of backyard renovation, fencing, solar lights, custom tile work, I was finally going to enjoy it. But then I heard it. A fizz. From the deep end. At first I thought it was the filter kicking in, until the bubbles started multiplying like gremlins in a detergent store. Suddenly the entire surface disappeared under thick white foam. I ran to the edge, trying to understand what happened. Then I saw it. A trail of white powder stuck along the coping, leading straight to the fence, and wedged between the wooden slats, a plastic bottle cap, tossed over. And who lives on the other side of that fence? The self-proclaimed queen of clean lawns, clipboard tyrant of our neighborhood, HOA Karen. She hated my tiki torches, hated my pizza oven, said my solar flamingos were a visual assault. But her biggest grievance? My pool. She once filed a complaint because my water was too blue. So yeah, I marched straight to her house, fists clenched, heart thumping. She opened the door with that frozen smile, the kind you wear when you're guilty and proud of it. I asked, point blank, "Did you dump soap into my pool?" She didn't even flinch. "Maybe your pool was just craving a bubble bath," she said. I was speechless. When I demanded an explanation, she waved the HOA manual in my face. "Community aesthetics fall under my jurisdiction," she said. Apparently, the board had granted her emergency decorative powers after a few neighbors complained about visual disharmony. Translation: Karen didn't like my style. I walked away before I said something I'd regret. Back at home, the foam had started to settle, but the water was cloudy. My filter sounded like it was chewing on drywall. I couldn't prove she did it. Not yet. But in my gut, I knew. And I don't get mad. I get methodical. I stayed up that night researching bubble reactions, and then something interesting popped up in my notes. During renovations, my contractor had added an emergency overflow pipe, one that drained downhill, right under the fence line, directly into Karen's freshly seeded lawn. The same lawn she'd been bragging about using eco-certified, no-chemical, hand-harvested unicorn grass seed on. And just like that, the revenge plan wrote itself. Part 2, the blueprint, the backflush, and the bubble payback. I didn't waste time. The very next morning, I called Max, civil engineer, pool owner, longtime friend, and most importantly, a man who once built a catapult out of lawn chairs to launch water balloons across state lines. Max lived for this stuff. We walked my yard with a tape measure, a flashlight, and a blueprint of my plumbing setup printed on his tablet. "It's doable," he said, grinning. "Gravity's on our side." By nightfall, We had rigged a temporary diversion valve, one that would reroute any future backflush from my pool pump directly into the narrow trench under the fence. It was subtle, clean, undetectable from her side, and absolutely beautiful. But I wasn't just going to rely on plumbing. I mounted a new camera, high-res, wide angle, pointed discreetly at the fence line. If Karen pulled anything again, I'd have her on film. I logged chemical levels, started documenting foam patterns, and saved screenshots of every weird residue that popped up after that day. Then I waited, and like clockwork, 2 nights later, the bubbles returned. Not as extreme, but obvious. And just like before, I followed the trail, white powder, faint suds. Another bottle cap near the fence. I checked the footage. There she was, 2:17 a.m. hoodie, gloves, chucking something over with all the stealth of a raccoon on Red Bull. I smiled, grabbed my phone, and flipped the valve. Bloop! Water rushed down the pipe, trickling like justice through PVC, right into her lawn, the same sacred soil she used to bless with essential oils and talk to like it was a bonsai tree. Revenge was activated. Part 3. The dye job, the denial, and the duck out. The next morning, I added just a pinch of pool-safe blue dye to the water. Nothing toxic, just enough to tint the foam a ghostly sky blue. By sunrise, her pristine eco-grass had streaks like a detergent ad gone wrong. I sipped my coffee by the kitchen window and waited. 10 minutes later, her screen door slammed. "What the?" Karen's voice echoed across the yards like a fire alarm. She stomped through the grass in fuzzy slippers, kicking at the suds, holding up clumps like forensic evidence. I waved from my porch. "Everything okay over there?" I called, all innocence. She glared, didn't respond, then stormed back inside. That afternoon, she started posting in the HOA group chat. "Someone is targeting my lawn. This is domestic grass terrorism. I have reason to suspect foul play." That last one might have been a typo, or the universe planting a seed. Because the next phase of my plan, let's just say, it involved feathers. Part 4. The feathers, the fallout, and the flamingo defense. The idea hit me mid-laugh. Karen had called it foul play, and while I knew she meant foul, I couldn't resist the cosmic sign, so I made a few calls. My cousin Jamie runs a backyard bird sanctuary. Within 24 hours, I had 4 ducks and a retired therapy goose chilling in a travel pen in my garage. And these weren't shy birds. They were loud, curious, and very, very messy. That night, I waited until her motion sensor porch lights flicked off. Then, I opened the side gate. The birds waddled straight into the freshly soaked lawn, quacking like they owned the place. I tossed a handful of oats under the fence, nothing damaging, just enough to keep them interested. In the morning, Karen lost her mind. Screaming echoed from her yard like a banshee chorus. I peeked out and saw feathers flying, footprints everywhere. And my personal favorite? The goose sitting squarely in the center of her garden gnome display, honking like a lawn alarm. I walked outside casually, pretending to inspect my sprinklers. Karen stormed over in socks and fury. "Did you release poultry into my property?" "Technically," I said. "They're waterfowl." She screeched something about sanitation codes and zoonotic transmission. I offered her a rake. She stomped off. But the damage? Already done. Someone had filmed the whole thing, the birds, the yelling, the honking, and posted it to the local Facebook group, Karen versus the Quack Squad. Within hours, it had over 3,000 views. And HOA Karen? She wasn't just a tyrant anymore. she was entertainment. Part 5. The Town Hall, the Takedown, and the Tarp of Shame. Karen didn't show her face for 2 days after the Quack Squad incident. Not during her usual 6 a.m. patrol, not in the group chat, not even to scold the neighbor's toddler for sidewalk chalk flowers. But on the 3rd day, oh, she returned. With a vengeance. She called an emergency HOA meeting. Subject line: Civil decay and aquatic lawbreakers. I went, of course, front row, popcorn in hand. Karen walked in like she was leading a royal tribunal, clipboard, neck scarf, and what I swear were tactical gardening gloves. She launched into a 20-minute monologue about unchecked chaos, animal infiltration, and her personal trauma at the sight of goose droppings near her begonias. I stayed silent until she said, "And I know who's behind this aquatic anarchy." I raised my hand. "Are we discussing illegal soap dumping or birds today? Because I brought the wrong binder." A few neighbors chuckled. Karen did not. She slammed a printed photo on the table, a grainy screenshot of my pool pump setup from over the fence. "Unpermitted plumbing modification," she hissed. "Drainage sabotage. Environmental terrorism." I calmly passed around my evidence binder. Footage of her throwing detergent into my pool. Timestamps. Water chemistry logs. Even the footage of her trespassing to take those very photos. The room fell silent. Then Alan, the retired firefighter 3 doors down, said, "You dumped bubbles in his pool, and now you're mad your lawn has soap in it?" Karen's lips tightened. The HOA president leaned forward. "Karen, did you really authorize that detergent dump?" She stammered something about aesthetic emergencies. That's when Max stood up, God bless him, and said, "If that's an emergency, I'm calling FEMA for my flamingos." Laughter broke out. Karen snapped. She stood, declared this entire meeting a conspiracy against order, and stormed out. But before she left, she did one more thing. She dragged a massive blue tarp across her lawn, staked it into the ground, and taped a sign to her fence that read, "This yard has been violated. Investigation pending." The ducks? They pooped on it. Part 6. The inspection, the implosion, and the HOA coup. By Monday morning, the tarp was soaked. Rain had hit overnight, and Karen's sad little protest sheet now sagged like a wet burrito over her precious eco-lawn. But that wasn't the best part. The best part? The city inspector showed up. Yep. Clipboard. Badge. Measuring stick. Apparently someone, definitely not me, probably Max, had filed a request for an irrigation compliance review. Karen came flying out of her house like a peacock on espresso. "What are you doing here?" she shrieked. The inspector didn't flinch. "Got a complaint about unpermitted drainage trenches and runoff into city lines. Standard review." Karen tried to block him with her arms. "This is my property." But he walked right past her and started taking photos of her sprinkler system and the gravel trench she carved behind the hydrangeas. He even lifted a flap of the tarp with his boot and muttered, "This is not ideal." She followed him around like a frantic tour guide, babbling about targeted neighborhood harassment and feral waterfowl conspiracies. He didn't even look up, just nodded, wrote things down, and eventually said, "I'll file the report with the county. If you've diverted stormwater into a city line without a permit, that's going to be a fine." Karen, physically, deflated. She opened her mouth, then closed it, then turned and stomped back into her house without another word. But things weren't done unraveling just yet. That night, the HOA board called a vote, not about my pool, not about drainage, about Karen. Linda, the retired teacher who makes legendary zucchini bread, stood up and read a motion. Due to repeated overreach, unauthorized actions, and ongoing disruption to the community, I propose that Karen be suspended from all HOA duties, pending a full review. The vote? Unanimous. Even Karen's only ally, Bob from Lot 12, abstained after someone whispered, "Didn't she once fine you for your bird bath?" Karen didn't show up to defend herself, maybe because she knew, or maybe because the inspector had returned that afternoon, with a notice taped to her door. Violation. Fine pending. Mandatory correction order. Her reign was over. But my plan? That wasn't finished yet, because Karen's obsession had finally made her the villain of her own HOA story, and I was just getting started. Part 7. The duck storm, the drama, and the donation drive with Karen officially dethroned. Her power reduced to group chat rants and passive-aggressive wind chimes. I had two options: let it go, or go legendary. Guess which one I picked? It started with a rumor. Whispers that HOA Karen was planning a neighborhood cleanup day. Her personal attempt at redemption, complete with garbage bags, neon vests, and decorative guidelines printed on laminated sheets. She posted it to the new HOA message board like it was the second coming of suburban order. But here's the kicker. She scheduled it on the same Saturday I'd already reserved for my pool fundraiser encore, a follow-up event from the BBQ that had blown up online. This time, it was for a good cause, a local shelter for retired service dogs. We had flyers, a donation link, even a pop-up splash zone for kids. But Karen? She called it visual pollution. So, I activated the ducks. Remember those foul play jokes? Well, Max had a cousin, and that cousin had ducks. Not plastic ones. Real, waddling, flapping, nosy little ducks that loved water and chaos. Saturday morning, just as Karen began handing out her color-coded trash bags. I released the squad from their holding pen beside the shed. 12 ducks, with zero respect for HOA boundaries. They waddled in formation, through the side gate, straight into Karen's freshly reseeded lawn, quacking, splashing, peeling up turf like a salad bar. Her screams could be heard 3 blocks over, but that wasn't the best part. Because just as she tried to shoo them away with a broom, one particularly bold duck, later named Sergeant Quackers by the neighborhood kids, flapped up onto her porch and knocked over her decorative topiary. She slipped, fell back onto a folding chair, and the whole thing was caught on camera. By Brian. Again. That footage? It ended up on TikTok. Caption: Karen's lawn gets ducked. HOA edition. Within hours, it had 80,000 views. The comments: this duck deserves a medal. Visual harmony equals achieved. Not all heroes wear capes. Some wear feathers. Karen tried, she really tried, to spin it. She emailed the board, claimed biological terrorism, accused me of weaponizing poultry. But nobody bought it, because while she was writing angry drafts, I was handing out lemonade, collecting donations, and laughing with neighbors who were finally free of her reign. And just before sunset, as the last duck waddled back into its crate, Max turned to me and said, "This might be the most peaceful this neighborhood's ever felt." I nodded, watching Karen through her window, her blinds shut tight, her clipboard lying forgotten on the porch. She didn't come out again that night, because deep down, she knew. The HOA had flipped, the ducks had landed, and her lawn would never be the same. Part 8. The cleanup, the karma, and the coronation. By Monday morning, Karen's backyard looked like a war zone sponsored by a detergent company and a rebellious flock of birds. Patchy grass, upside-down lawn chairs, bubble residue clinging to her gnome collection like frost on a grave. But the real damage wasn't to her yard. It was to her reputation. The HOA board, now free from her iron grip, called an emergency meeting, not to address duck-related terrorism, as Karen had requested, but to officially finalize the vote on permanent removal of her neighborhood authority privileges. She tried to make a scene, showed up in a blazer 2 sizes too tight, holding a binder labeled Lawn Ethics and Moral Hydrology. She brought charts, color-coded graphs, even a hand-drawn duck migration map. But this time, nobody flinched. Sharon, the same board member she once tried to fine for having pink tulips, calmly raised her hand and asked, "Do you have any proof that Marcus orchestrated this avian invasion?" Karen stuttered, shuffled her papers, then muttered something about subliminal duck training. The room broke into laughter, and just like that, the vote was unanimous. Karen was out. No more emergency powers, no more decorative rulings, no more clipboards, unless they were for grocery lists. But that wasn't the end. Because the board wasn't just removing her, they were replacing her. And to my complete shock, they handed me a nomination form. "You've been the calm in the chaos," Sharon said. "And let's be real. Your backyard diplomacy is legendary." I didn't want to say yes. I wasn't a leader. I was a guy who rerouted bubbles with plumbing. But when the crowd clapped, when Max shouted, "Duck President!" from the back row, I knew what had to be done. So I accepted. That night, the neighborhood threw a spontaneous block party. No rules, no fines, just food, laughter, and someone blasting Eye of the Tiger from a Bluetooth speaker shaped like a pineapple. As I stood at my grill, flipping burgers with one hand and holding a lemonade in the other, a neighbor tapped my shoulder. She handed me a homemade cookie, shaped like a duck, frosted in HOA blue. "I voted for you," she whispered. I smiled, and from across the street, I saw Karen, peeking through her curtains, defeated, clipboardless, watching the celebration she could have been part of. If only she'd chosen peace over power. And in that moment, I realized, you don't need a title to lead. You just need a pool, a plan, and maybe a few ducks.